Hey kiddos! Alrighty, we are in the middle of chapter 7, so we're on page 100, kind of at that line break where it says back at cabin 11. Okay, so back at cabin 11, everybody was talking and horsing around waiting for dinner. For the first time, I noticed a lot of campers had similar features: sharp noses, upturned eyebrows, and a mischievous smile. They were the kind of kids that teachers would peg as troublemakers. Thankfully, nobody paid much attention to me as I walked over to the spot on the floor and plopped down with my Minotaur horn. The counselor, Luke, came over. He had the Hermes family resemblance too. It was marred by the scar on his right cheek, but his smile was intact. "Found you a sleeping bag," he said. "And here, I stole you some toiletries from the camp store." Couldn't tell if he was kidding about the stealing part. So I just said, "Thanks." "No prob." Luke sat next to me, pushed my back up against the wall. "Tough first day?" "I just don't belong here," I said. "I just don't really believe in gods." "Yeah," he said. "That's how we all started. Once you start believing in them, it just doesn't get any easier." The bitterness in his voice seemed surprised me, because Luke seemed like a pretty easygoing guy. He looked like he could handle just about anything. "So, your dad is Hermes?" I asked. He pulled a switchblade out of his back pocket, and for a second I thought he was going to gut me, but he just scraped the mud out of the soles of his sandals. "Yeah, Hermes." "The wing-footed messenger guy?" "Yeah, that's him. Messenger, medicine, travelers, merchants, and thieves. Anybody who uses the road. That's why you're here, enjoying Cabin 11's hospitality. Hermes isn't picky about who he sponsors." I figured Luke didn't mean to call me a nobody, but he just had a lot on his mind. "You ever meet your dad?" I asked. "Well, once." I waited, thinking that if he wanted to tell me, then he would, and apparently he didn't. I wondered if this story had anything to do with how he might have got that scar on his eye. Luke looked up and managed a smile. "Don't worry about it, Percy. The campers here, they're mostly good people. After all, sorry, I lost my spot. Mostly good people. After all, we're extended family, right? We take care of each other." He seemed to understand how lost I felt, and I was grateful for that, because an older guy like him, even if he was a counselor, should have steered clear of an uncool middle schooler like me. But Luke had welcomed me into the cabin. He'd even stolen me some toiletries, which was the nicest thing anyone had done for me all day. I decided to ask him one big question, the one that had been bothering me all afternoon. "So Clarice from Aries was joking about me being one of the big three material. Then Annabeth twice. She said I might be the one. She said I should talk to the Oracle. What is that all about?" Luke folded his knife. "Ugh, I hate prophecies." "What do you mean?" His face twitched around his scar. "Let's just say I messed things up for everybody else. The last 2 years, ever since my trip to the Garden of Hesperides, the last 2 years, sorry, the last 2 years, ever since my trip to the Garden of Hesperides went sour, Huron hasn't allowed me on any more quests. Annabeth's been dying to get out into the real world. She pestered Huron so much he finally told her he knew her fate. He'd had a prophecy from the Oracle. He wouldn't tell her the whole thing, but she said Annabeth wasn't destined to go on a quest yet. She had to wait until somebody special came to camp." "Somebody special?" "Don't worry about it, kid," Luke said. "Annabeth wants to think every new camper who comes through here is the omen she's been waiting for. Now, come on, it's dinner time." The moment he said it, a horn blew in the distance. Somehow I knew it was a conch shell, even though I'd never heard one before. A conch shell is like one of those big shells at the ocean you might hold to your ear and hear the ocean on the inside. The Luke yelled, 11, like cabin 11, fall in. The whole cabin, about 20 of us, filed into the common yards. We lined up in order of seniority, so I was dead last. Campers came from the other cabins too, except for the 3 empty cabins at the end, and cabin 8, which had looked normal in the daytime, but now was starting to glow silver as the sun went down. We marched up the hill to the mess hall pavilion. Satyrs joined us from the meadows, naiads emerged from the canoeing lakes, and a few girls came out of the woods. And when I say came out of the woods, I mean straight out of the woods. I saw one girl about 9 or 10 years old melt from the side of a maple tree and come skipping up the hill. In all, there were maybe 100 campers, a few dozen satyrs, and a dozen assorted wooden nymphs and naiads. At the pavilion, torches blazed around about the marble columns. A central fire burned in a bronze, it was the size of a bathtub. Each cabin had its own table, covered in white cloth trimmed in purple. 4 of the tables were empty, but cabin 11's, it was way overcrowded. I had to squeeze on the edge of a bench, with half my butt hanging off. I saw Grover sitting at a table 12 with Mr. D, a few satyrs, and a couple of plump blonde boys who looked just like Mr. D. Chiron stood to one side, the picnic table being way too small for a centaur. Annabeth sat at table 6 with a bunch of serious-looking athletic kids, all with gray eyes and honey blonde hair. Clarice sat behind me at the Aries table. She'd apparently gotten over being hosed down because she was laughing and belching right alongside of her friends. Finally, Chiron pounded his hoof against the marble floor of the pavilion, and everyone fell silent. He raised a glass. To the gods! Everybody else raised their glass and said, to the gods! Wood nymphs came forward with platters of food, grapes and apples and strawberries, cheese, fresh bread, and yes, barbecue. My glass was empty, but Luke said, speak to it, whatever you want. So I said, cherry Coke. The glass filled with a sparkling caramel liquid. Then I had an idea. Blue cherry Coke. The soda turned a violent shade of cobalt. I took a cautious sip. It was perfect. I drank a toast to my mother. She's not gone, I told myself. Not permanently anyways. She's in the underworld. And if that's a real place, then someday... Here you go, Percy, Luke said, handing me a platter of smoked brisket. This is making me hungry. I loaded my plate and was about to take a big bite when I noticed everybody getting up, carrying their plates towards the fire in the center of the pavilion. I wondered if they were going for dessert or something. Come on, Luke told me. As I got closer, I saw that everybody was taking a portion of their meal and dropping it into the fire. The ripest strawberry, the juiciest slice of beef, the warmest, most buttery roll. Luke muttered in her ear, burnt offerings for the gods. They like the smell. You're kidding, right? His look warned me not to take this lightly, but I couldn't help wondering why an immortal, all-powerful being would like the smell of burning food. Luke approached the fire, bowed his head, and tossed in a cluster of fat red grapes. Hermes, he said. I was next. I wished I knew the god's name to say. Finally, I made a silent plea. Whoever you are, tell me, please. I scraped a big slice of brisket into the flames. When I caught a whiff of the smoke, I didn't gag. It smelled nothing like burning fumes. It smelled of hot chocolate and fresh baked brownies, hamburgers on the grill and wildflowers and hundreds of other good things that shouldn't have gone well together, but somehow they did. I could almost believe the gods could live off that smoke. When everybody had returned to their seats and finished eating their meal, Huron pounded his hoof again for our attention. Mr. D got up with a huge sigh. Ugh, yeah, I suppose I better say hello to all you brats. Well, hello. Our activity director, Huron, says the next Capture the Flag game is on Friday. Cabin 5, they presently hold the laurels. A bunch of ugly cheering rose from the Aries table. Personally, Mr. D continued, I could care less, but congratulations. Also, I should tell you all we have a new camper today. I think his name is like Peter Johnson. Huron muttered something. Ugh, I mean Percy Jackson, Mr. D corrected. That's right, hooray and all that. Now run along to your silly campfire. Go on. Everybody cheered, and we all headed. He's just, pretty awesome guy, Mr. D. Everybody cheered, and we all headed down towards the amphitheater, where Apollo led a sing-along, which of course makes sense because he's, god of music. So we all sang camp songs about the gods and ate s'mores and joked around. And the funny thing was, I didn't feel that anyone was staring at me anymore. I felt like I was at home. Later in the evening, when the sparks from the campfire were curling into, the lights went out on me, so it's hard to see. Later in the evening, when the sparks from the campfire were curling into a starry sky, the conch shell blew again, and we all filed back into our cabins. I didn't realize how exhausted I was until I collapsed on my borrowed sleeping bag. My fingers curled around the bullman horn, and I thought about my mom. But it was good thoughts. Her smile, the bedtime stories she read to me when I was a kid, and the way she would tell me not to let the bed bugs bite. When I closed my eyes, I fell asleep instantly. That was my first day at Camp Half-Blood. I wish I'd known how briefly I'd get to enjoy my new home. Alrighty, kiddos, what I would like for you to do is head over to Google Classroom, and your question is going to be, what did the campers have to put into the fire for the gods? So go answer that question, and then we will start on Chapter 8 tomorrow. Have a great afternoon, kiddos.